Do we have any insights into the mechanisms of initiation and termination of epileptic seizures?
We're beginning to get some idea about why seizures begin and why they stop, but quite surprisingly, for such simple questions, there's still a lot that's unclear. And this is obviously critical because epilepsy affects about 1% of the population. About 1 in 20 people will have seizures in their life. So these things are very, very common. And yet we're still only just scratching the surface. I think the best way to consider it is that, within the brain we have 100 billion nerve cells and they're all connected together. And what happens in a seizure is that a collection of those nerve cells start firing together and excessively, and then that sort of spreads or starts to spread through the brain. If it spreads very quickly and the whole brain gets involved, then somebody will have a convulsion. If it just stays in one place, then the person will just have a seizure that represents the function of that particular part or area of the brain. And why they start is probably because the brain has a number of inhibitory neurons, nerve cells, that dampens down this excitation and tries to keep it under control. And if that control fails, then we have this sort of explosion of activity. And what happens when that explosion of activity happens is that the brain then desperately tries to stop it, and so you get increasing amounts of inhibition trying to dampen that excessive activity down until eventually the inhibition does succeed and most seizures terminate within a minute or so. And then afterwards people may be confused because the area of the brain will not function properly because of all the inhibition that's occurred. If the inhibition doesn't succeed, and rarely that occurs, then seizures can just continue into something called status epilepticus, which is a dangerous condition in which people have continuous seizure activity. It's rare, but it is dangerous. And one of the other big questions that's really facing us is when the seizures begin, do they just suddenly start? Is it like a sudden riot? Or are there little rumblings that occur before that may give us a clue? Is it more like a sort of volcano going off? Are there little rumbles that would precede the volcanic eruption so that we would be able to predict when seizures occur? And I think one of the big breakthroughs that's occurring is the realization that there may be signatures or little things that are happening before the seizure occurs that may enable us to predict when seizures are about to happen. And if we're able to do that, then we may be able to prevent the seizures from occurring, so it'll be a means of treatment.